This week, House Foreign Affairs pressed Secretary Rubio on the cost of an Iran war Americans are absorbing, gas, food, shipping, all up. The president said he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation. Then Meeks asked if anyone warned him. Rubio refused 4 times. They knew. So watch the exchange, and our research team will break down the full analysis at the end. Let's watch the hearing.
I'm going to ask you to answer my questions quickly because clearly the chairman wants to protect you. That's why he's cutting me off my opening statement. But, Secretary.
You had 5 minutes.
Yeah. Secretary, you have the honor of serving both the acting National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. In these roles, you've played a central role in advising the President as Commander-in-Chief to launch a war against Iran, and the impacts of this choice have been significant on our allies and partners who immediately have targeted by retaliatory strikes, as well as for Americans here at home. 3 months into this war, gas and food prices are up, inflation is rising, American business owners and farmers are struggling from higher shipping and commodity costs, and yet the President said 2 weeks ago, and I quote, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation." That's a quote that should alarm every American. Americans are also rightfully concerned that while they struggle with affordability due to the war in Iran, the President of the United States is busy day trading on it. He disclosed purchases of stocks in energy and defense companies in the first quarter of this year that were made just as those companies' profits were soaring from the war in Iran. On March 23rd, the same day he reversed his threat to strike Iranian energy, infrastructure, and energy stocks rose. He bought stocks then in Phillips 66, Exxon, and Chevron. Secretary, I have a few questions, and again, given the amount of time that I have, I will ask you to give me yes and no answers. Did you warn President Trump before the war in Iran began that this conflict would drive up costs on gas, food, travel, and shipment?
Yeah, I'll warn you right now, I don't do yes or no answers.
Yeah,
So
well,
these
I
are
only have
complex
5
questions.
minutes. I know when
Well,
you
so
were
do
the
I.
senator, you know
I
about
never
this
did yes or
business,
no answers
and I
to
know
people.
you're trying to go out so that you can run out my 5 minutes. That's a simple
I'm not
question.
gonna run out your 5 minutes. You're running out your 5 minutes.
Did you-
I don't do yes or no question. You want to answer me a question? I'll answer
I'm
your
answering
question.
you. Answer my question my way. It's my time. Did you?
Did I what?
Yes or no? Did you warn President Trump
The president
before
was
the
fully-
Iran war began that this conflict would drive up cost on gas, food, travel, and shipment?
The president,
yes or no?
The president and the full administration was aware that there would be consequences to action, but the consequences
Let
of
me
Iran
move
having
on.
a nuclear weapon were worse.
Did you warn him? Did you warn him that launching a war in Iran could result in the regime placing a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz?
All the risk factors were understood, but the most important risk factor
I just
was
want to know if
Iran
you did
cannot
your
have a
job.
nuclear
Did you
weapon.
warn him?
Iran
If
cannot
you
have a
did warn him,
nuclear
say
weapon.
yes. It's simple.
Everyone was aware of what Iran might
Did you
do in
warn him?
retaliation.
I'm asking you a second. Did you
Everyone
warn him?
was aware.
Don't
of
want to
what
answer that. Let
Iran
me ask
would
you the
do.
next question.
But the worst part
Did
is that
you
they
warn
can't
the
have a
president that launching U.S. strikes against Iran would result in retaliatory attacks on U.S. allies, partners, and Americans living or working in the Middle East?
Everyone
yes or
understood
no?
what Iran would do in response.
Did you warn them?
We were prepared for any response that
You
they
warn-
came out with.
Okay.
We knew it.
Just want to make sure.
But they can't have a nuclear
So
weapon.
you're saying you warned them? Did you warn the president that the personal stock purchases and companies profiting from the war that he launched could present a conflict of interest?
I'm not aware of the president's stock purchases. I don't deal with that, and I don't even know what you're saying is true.
Well, we know that because it is made public what his stock purchases were.
You say so. I don't read the president's financial disclosure, but I don't believe that to be true.
Well, I think then the president should be more transparent. Secretary Rubio, because these are basic questions that I'm asking you, and to be transparent with the American people. This is what this is all about, the transparency. So, for example, when you go and look at some of your statements that you made in regards to Cuba, I only have 58 seconds left, and I'd love to get it, but you talked about Gaisa, who was controlling the military and what's taking place there, and that they had the opportunity to benefit while the Cuban people are suffering. So what we're seeing here now, the one person that's benefited from this war by his purchase of stocks, him and his friends, they have made billions of dollars while the American people are suffering. You've accused And I agree with reference to some folks, what they're doing in Cuba and how they're making money while people suffer. That's what's taking place in the United States of America. The Trump administration and his friends are making billions of dollars while the American people suffer. And they continue to suffer.
Breaks my
as
heart, but
gas
ranking
prices
member's time.
What made this exchange land was its specificity. Congressman Gregory Meeks did not ask whether the Iran war was a good idea or whether it had succeeded or whether the world was better for it. He asked a much sharper question. Before the President of the United States ordered the strike, did the Secretary of State and acting National Security Advisor warn him about the predictable costs that the country would now have to absorb? Gas prices, food prices, inflation, retaliation against American allies and partners, a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. Meeks wanted that warning or its absence on the official record. Rubio refused to give a yes or no answer. That refusal is the story. Everything else in the exchange is commentary on it. Meeks set the tone by quoting the president directly. 2 weeks before the hearing, President Trump had said, on the record, that he does not think about the financial situation of Americans. Meeks treated that quote as a fact pattern, not a slogan. It is the kind of quote that, dropped into a congressional hearing about a war that is raising household costs, becomes more than rhetoric. It becomes a measurement. If the chief executive has publicly said he is not thinking about how this conflict hits American families, then every question about whether he was warned about that impact carries more weight, not less. Meeks knew exactly what he was doing when he put that quote into the hearing record before he asked any policy question. Meeks then added a second uncomfortable fact pattern. He noted that the president had disclosed purchases of stocks in energy and defense companies in the first quarter, and that some of those purchases lined up with Iran policy reversals. He specifically mentioned March 23rd, when the president reversed his threat to strike Iranian energy infrastructure and energy stocks rose. He named Phillips 66, Exxon, and Chevron. Meeks did not call this corrupt. He did not allege a crime. He treated it as a documented timing pattern that the public should know about. The hearing record now reflects that the Secretary of State was asked about it, in the same exchange in which he was asked whether he had warned the president about the household costs of the war. The two threads were braided together on purpose. Meeks then posed his central question in the simplest possible form. Did the Secretary of State warn the president that the conflict would drive up costs on gas, food, travel, and shipping? Yes or no? He repeated the question. He repeated it again. He explained that he only had 5 minutes and that the format was deliberate. Rubio refused to answer yes or no. He said he does not do yes or no answers. He said he would answer in his own way. That is a normal defense from a senior official under questioning. It is also a defense that, in this specific case, leaves the public without the most basic fact about how the decision was made. Were the predictable household costs of this war flagged before the war started, or were they not? Rubio's repeated answer was that the president and the full administration were aware that there would be consequences to action, but that the consequences of Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon were worse. That is a serious answer. It is also a different answer than the one Meeks was asking for. Meeks was asking about a specific warning. Rubio was answering with a strategic frame. Those are not the same. The strategic frame is a defense of the policy. The specific warning is a question about the process. The hearing record now contains the strategic frame in full, repeated multiple times, and contains no specific yes or no on whether the household cost warning was given. That is the gap that future oversight will have to close. Meeks then narrowed his question to the most predicted retaliation. Did the secretary warn the president that the conflict could place a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz? Again, the answer was that all the risk factors were understood and that nothing was more important than preventing an Iranian nuclear weapon. Again, the specific yes or no was not delivered. That matters because the closure of the strait, in the analysis of every credible defense and energy planner, was the single most likely retaliation. If it was warned about and acted on anyway, the public deserves to hear that decision defended on its merits. If it was not warned about, the public deserves to hear that too. Either answer is workable. The non-answer is the only outcome that leaves accountability impossible. Meeks pressed the third predictable consequence. Did the secretary warn the president that the strike would result in retaliatory attacks on American allies, partners, and Americans living or working in the Middle East? That category is wide and specific at the same time. Wide because it captures everyone from civilian contractors to deployed service members. Specific because every analyst said exactly that this would happen. Rubio again said that everyone understood what Iran would do in response. Meeks again asked for a yes or no on whether the warning was actually issued. Again, that yes or no did not arrive. The exchange settled into a pattern that anyone watching could see. One side asking the simplest possible factual question, one side providing a different answer. It is worth taking a moment to explain why the yes or no question is not a partisan gimmick. Policy decisions in a democracy are made through a process. The process includes risk warnings. Risk warnings in the executive branch are documented. If a Secretary of State warns the President of specific risks before a decision, that warning is a fact the country can reason about later. The warning may have been overruled. The warning may have been weighed against bigger risks. That is fine. The system tolerates difficult decisions. What the system cannot tolerate is the inability to confirm whether the warning was given at all. Without that fact, voters and future presidents cannot evaluate this decision honestly. Meeks was asking for that fact. Rubio's strongest line of defense, repeated through the exchange, was that the most important risk in the entire scenario was that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That is a defensible posture. Nonproliferation is a real, durable, bipartisan American interest. There is a long history of presidents from both parties acting forcefully to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. If the Iran strike fits into that lineage, the administration has a strong argument. The challenge is that the strategic argument and the procedural question were two different things. Meeks was not asking whether the strike was justified by nonproliferation. He was asking whether the household cost was acknowledged in the briefing room before the strike. Rubio kept answering the question Meeks did not ask. At several points, the chair intervened to manage time. Meeks pushed back. He said he only had 5 minutes. He said the witness was running out his clock by refusing direct answers. The secretary said he was not running out the clock and would answer his way. That moment of friction also matters for the record. 5-minute congressional rounds are a real constraint. If a witness can spend most of those minutes restating a strategic frame, the questioner cannot extract the specific factual answer that congressional oversight depends on. That is a structural feature of these hearings, and it benefits whoever does not want a yes or no in the record. Meeks knew it. The secretary knew it. The exchange was an example of how the rule plays out in real time. Meeks anchored his entire questioning in a specific cost picture. 3 months into the war, gas prices were up, food prices were up, inflation was rising, and American business owners and farmers were absorbing higher shipping and commodity costs. He attributed those increases to the conflict. Whether each line item is fully attributable to the war is a real economic question that will be debated. But the trend lines are public. The pump and the grocery shelf are measurable. The questioning was not abstract. It was tied to numbers that Americans see every week. That is what makes the yes or no on warnings important. The cost is real. The decision happened. The country deserves to know whether the cost was anticipated by the people who advised the president. There is a structural reason Meeks led with the presidential quote. Once a presidential statement enters the congressional record through a question, it becomes a permanent reference point for future oversight. Other members can cite it. Future panels can build on it. Researchers can reference it. The hearing transcript is a long-term archive, and what gets read into it carries weight. By placing the quote alongside the warning question, Meeks turned a passing political comment into a piece of formal oversight context. Whether or not anyone watching that day remembered the moment, the record will. The references to presidential stock purchases in energy and defense are a separate accountability thread that will have its own life. Meeks did not allege legal violations. He referenced a public disclosure. The thread runs alongside the warning question without merging into it. That is the responsible way to use congressional time on a topic that overlaps with personal finance ethics. The disclosure exists. The timing pattern is documented. The relationship between the president's policy moves and the timing of those moves is a question that future congressional committees, inspectors general, and journalists will examine. Meeks's contribution was to make sure the topic was raised in a foreign policy hearing where the underlying decisions were also being discussed. The most important follow-up to this exchange is not who sounded sharper. It is what the briefing documents and pre-decision memoranda show. Inside the executive branch, before a major military decision, there are risk assessments. They are written, they name specific consequences, they are reviewed by senior officials, they become part of the historical record of the decision. Future congressional oversight has every legal authority to request and subpoena those documents. If those documents show that warnings on costs, on retaliation, and on the Strait of Hormuz were given, the country has a clearer picture of the decision-making. If they show those warnings were not given, the country has a different picture. Either way, the documents settle the yes or no that the witness would not answer. There is a habit in congressional hearings of dismissing 5-minute rounds as theater. That is a misreading. 5-minute rounds add up. Multiple members asking similar specific questions create a layered record. A witness can deflect once. A witness can deflect twice. By the time 5 or 6 members ask the same factual question, the deflection itself becomes the answer. The transcript starts to look like a witness who will not concede a single fact in either direction. That pattern is exactly what oversight institutions catalog. It is also what later hearings build on. The Meeks exchange is one entry in a longer record. It will be read alongside future entries when the country writes the history of this war. There are 2 markers worth watching after this hearing. The first is whether the House Foreign Affairs Committee follows up with a formal document request for the pre-decision risk assessments related to the Iran strike. If that request comes, it will be a sign that the yes or no question is being pursued through the formal oversight channels. The second is whether the president's stock disclosures are referenced in subsequent ethics or oversight inquiries from other committees. If both threads are pursued, this hearing will be remembered as a setup for a larger reckoning. If neither thread is pursued, this hearing will stand alone as a moment when the questions were asked and the answers were withheld. There is a broader governance lesson underneath this exchange. Major foreign policy decisions almost always carry predictable second-order effects on the domestic economy. That is just how the modern global system works. Energy prices, shipping costs, insurance costs, food prices, and household budgets are connected to events thousands of miles away. The country can absorb those costs when the decisions are necessary. What erodes public trust is the sense that those costs were not acknowledged inside the government before the decisions were made. Documented warnings, even if overruled, are part of how a serious country runs a foreign policy. The Meeks exchange is a reminder that the public expects to see those warnings, eventually, in some form on the record. Step back further, hearing transcripts are long-lived. They outlive election cycles. They sit in archives. They are read by historians, by lawyers, by future officials, by journalists writing post-mortems. What gets entered into a transcript matters more than the cable news segment that follows the hearing. Meeks understood that. His questioning was structured to put specific facts into a record that will survive him, the secretary, and the current administration. The yes or no questions, the quote, the stock purchase reference, the cost figures, are all now part of the formal congressional archive on this period. Decades from now, when the history of this conflict is written, that archive will be a source. Give Rubio his due, his repeated answer was not nothing. He was making a strategic argument that a sitting Secretary of State has every right to make. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The risk of failing to prevent that outcome outweighs the cost of the response. That is a serious argument. It is also one that will be debated for years. Meeks was not denying the seriousness of that argument. He was asking for the procedural fact that sits underneath it. Both sides did what they came to do. Rubio defended the policy. Meeks pressed the process. Neither side conceded ground. That is what a working oversight hearing looks like when it does not produce a headline answer. So the final accountability question is the one Meeks pushed throughout. What was gained, what was lost, and who is paying the cost? If the gain is a verifiable, lasting setback to the Iranian nuclear program and a clear public record that warnings were issued and weighed before the decision, then the administration has a serious case to make. If the cost is a sustained increase in American household expenses, a damaged set of allies absorbing retaliation, and a record that says the warnings either were not given or cannot be confirmed, then the case becomes much harder. The committee should make both sides put their numbers on the table. Then the public can decide what kind of policy it is actually buying.